Dr. William Patterson was reviewing Martin Melcher's medical chart when something struck him as very wrong. It was April 20th, 1968, and Doris Day's husband had just died suddenly of what appeared to be a massive heart attack. But the numbers didn't add up. "This doesn't make sense," Dr. Patterson muttered to his colleague. A 52-year-old man in apparently good health, no history of heart disease, normal blood pressure. And then, nothing. His heart just stops? What Dr. Patterson didn't know was that he was looking at what would become one of Hollywood's greatest unsolved mysteries, the death that would expose decades of financial fraud, reveal a web of criminal connections, and leave America's sweetheart asking questions that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Now I'm going to tell you the story of Martin Melcher's mysterious death and the shocking discoveries that followed. The truth about what really happened on that April night and how one man's secrets nearly destroyed the woman who loved him. Martin Melcher had not been feeling well for several weeks before his death, but his symptoms were puzzling. He complained of severe headaches, nausea, and episodes of dizziness that came and went without warning. Doris had urged him to see a doctor, but Martin kept postponing the appointment. "I'm just stressed about the new projects," he would tell her. "Once we finish the TV deal negotiations, I'll be fine." But Doris noticed that Martin seemed more than stressed. He seemed frightened. He had started looking over his shoulder when they walked down the street, double-checking the locks on their Beverly Hills home and making mysterious phone calls that he would end abruptly when she entered the room. "Martin, what's wrong?" she had asked him just 2 days before his death. "You're acting like someone is after you." Martin's response was strange and would later take on sinister significance. "Maybe someone is," he had said quietly. "Maybe I've made some mistakes that are finally catching up with me." The night of Martin's death began normally enough. He and Doris had dinner at home, watched television, and went to bed around 10 p.m. At approximately 2:30 a.m., Doris was awakened by strange sounds from the bathroom. She found Martin on the floor, convulsing and gasping for breath. His face was a disturbing shade of blue and foam was coming from his mouth. "Call an ambulance," she screamed to their housekeeper, who had been awakened by the commotion. By the time paramedics arrived, Martin Melcher was dead. The official cause of death was listed as acute myocardial infarction, a heart attack. But several aspects of Martin's death troubled the medical professionals who treated him. First, the symptoms Doris described were not typical of a heart attack. The convulsions, the blue coloration of his skin, and especially the foam from his mouth suggested something else entirely. Second, the timeline was wrong. Heart attacks typically build over time, with warning signs that develop gradually. Martin had gone from apparently normal to dead in less than 30 minutes. Most troubling of all, when Dr. Patterson examined Martin's body, he found no evidence of the arterial blockages that typically cause fatal heart attacks. "I've seen hundreds of heart attack victims," Patterson later told colleagues. "This wasn't a heart attack." But if it wasn't a heart attack, then what was it? The answer to that question would begin to emerge in the weeks following Martin's death as Doris started going through his personal papers and business record. What she discovered would shock her more than his sudden death ever could. Martin Melcher had been living a double life for years. The man Doris thought she knew, her husband, business partner, and trusted advisor, had been systematically stealing from her while maintaining connections to some of the most dangerous people in Los Angeles. The first clue came when Doris's accountant, Jerome Rosenthal, called her for an emergency meeting just 1 week after Martin's funeral. "Doris, we have a serious problem," Rosenthal said, his face grave. "I've been going through Martin's files and there are some irregularities that we need to discuss." "What kind of irregularities?" Doris asked. "Money is missing. A lot of money, and there are contracts and business deals that you apparently signed, but I don't think you ever saw them." As Rosenthal explained what he had discovered, Doris felt sick to her stomach. Martin had been forging her signature on documents, moving money between accounts without her knowledge, and committing her to business deals that primarily benefited his own interest. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. Hidden in Martin's private safe, investigators found documents that revealed his connections to several individuals with known ties to organized crime. Loan agreements, investment partnerships, and correspondence that suggested Martin had been involved in money laundering schemes for years. "Your husband wasn't just stealing from you," FBI agent Robert Mueller explained to Doris during a meeting that took place 6 weeks after Martin's death. "He was using your money to finance illegal activities." The FBI had been investigating Martin for months before his death, though they had kept this information secret to protect Doris from being implicated in his scheme. "We believe Martin was under pressure from his criminal associates," Agent Mueller continued. "There's evidence that he had borrowed money from very dangerous people and was having trouble paying it back." This revelation cast Martin's strange behavior in the weeks before his death in a completely new light. He hadn't just been stressed about business. He had been terrified of people who could and would kill him if he didn't repay his debt. But the most shocking discovery came when investigators examined Martin's phone records from the week before his death. He had made 17 calls to a number that belonged to Vincent "Mad Dog" Call, a known enforcer for organized crime families in Los Angeles. According to FBI wiretaps, Call had been demanding immediate repayment of a $200,000 loan that Martin had taken out 6 months earlier. The money had been used to finance a real estate scheme that had failed spectacularly, leaving Martin unable to repay the debt. Phone conversations recorded by the FBI revealed the increasing desperation in Martin's voice as the deadline for repayment approached. "I need more time," Martin could be heard saying in a conversation from April 18, just 2 days before his death. "I can get the money, but I need another month." Call's response was chilling. "You've had enough time, Martin. We're done being patient." When investigators looked more closely at the circumstances of Martin's death, disturbing questions began to emerge. Why had Martin's symptoms been so unusual for a heart attack? Why had he died so quickly? And why had there been no evidence of arterial blockage during the medical examination? Patricia Henley, a toxicologist who was brought in to consult on the case, raised the possibility that had been lurking in everyone's minds but that nobody wanted to say out loud. "The symptoms described by Mrs. Day are consistent with poisoning," Dr. Henley reported. "Specifically, they match the effects of several compounds that can cause cardiac arrest while being difficult to detect in standard autopsies." The suggestion that Martin Melcher might have been murdered sent shockwaves through both the entertainment industry and law enforcement. If Martin had been killed, it meant that organized crime had reached into the heart of Hollywood and eliminated someone who posed a threat to their operations. But it also raised terrifying questions about Doris's safety. If Martin had been murdered because of his debts and criminal associations, was she also in danger? The FBI immediately placed Doris under protective surveillance, though they tried to keep this as discreet as possible to avoid alarming her further. Agent Mueller met with Doris again to explain the situation. "Mrs. Day, we have reason to believe that your husband's death may not have been natural," he said carefully. "We think he may have been killed because of money he owed to dangerous people." Doris stared at him in disbelief. "You're saying someone murdered Martin?" "We're saying it's a possibility we have to take seriously," Mueller replied. "And if that's what happened, you could be in danger too." The investigation into Martin's possible murder faced several obstacles. First, his body had been cremated immediately after the initial autopsy, making it impossible to conduct the more sophisticated toxicological tests that might have detected poison. Second, the criminal associates who might have been involved in his death were extremely careful about covering their tracks. Without physical evidence or witnesses, it would be nearly impossible to prove murder. But perhaps the biggest obstacle was Doris herself. Despite everything she had learned about Martin's deceptions and criminal connections, she was reluctant to believe that he had been murdered. "Martin made mistakes," she told Agent Mueller. "He did terrible things to me and to our finance, but I can't believe that someone would kill him for money." Her resistance to the murder theory stemmed partly from denial but also from fear. Accepting that Martin had been murdered would mean accepting that her own life had been intertwined with dangerous criminals for years without her knowledge. It would also mean living with the fear that she might be next. As months passed, the FBI investigation stalled. Without new evidence or witnesses willing to come forward, the case of Martin Melcher's suspicious death was quietly shelved. But the impact on Doris was profound and lasting. She became increasingly reclusive, rarely leaving her Carmel home except for necessary business. She installed elaborate security systems and hired bodyguards, though she tried to keep this as private as possible. Most significantly, she never trusted anyone with her business affairs again. The betrayal by Martin, combined with the possibility that he had been murdered because of his criminal activities, left her unable to form close personal relationships. Doris was never the same after Martin's death, said her longtime friend Kay Ballard. She had always been cautious about people's motives, but after 1968, she became almost paranoid about being betrayed or hurt again. The mystery of Martin Melcher's death took on new dimensions in 1975, when Vincent Mad Dog Call was arrested on unrelated charges. During his interrogation, Call made several cryptic references to taking care of problems for his criminal associates, including mentions of a Hollywood producer who had paid his debts in full. When FBI agents pressed him for details, Call smiled and said, "Some people pay with money, some people pay with their lives." Martin Melcher was smart enough to figure out which kind of payment was required. This statement was tantalizingly close to a confession, but it was also ambiguous enough that it couldn't be used as evidence in court. Call never provided additional details about Martin's death, and he was killed in prison in 1978 before investigators could question him further. With Call's death, the best chance of solving the mystery of Martin Melcher's fate disappeared forever. In 1982, nearly 15 years after Martin's death, new information emerged that cast his final months in an even more sinister light. A former associate of Martin's came forward with information about a meeting that had taken place just 1 week before Martin died. According to this witness, Martin had been desperately trying to sell Doris's Carmel property to raise money to pay his criminal debts. When Doris refused to agree to the sale, Martin had become panicked. He said he was a dead man if he couldn't come up with the money, the witness testified. He was talking about running away, maybe leaving the country. This revelation suggested that Martin had known his life was in danger and had been trying to find ways to escape his situation. It also raised the disturbing possibility that his death had been both murder and suicide, that he had chosen to take poison rather than face whatever his criminal associates had planned for him. Henley, the toxicologist, noted that several of the compounds that could have caused Martin's symptoms were readily available to someone with his connections. If Martin Melcher wanted to end his life quickly and make it look like natural causes, he had access to substances that could accomplish that, she observed. But this theory raised as many questions as it answered. If Martin had killed himself, why hadn't he left a note explaining his actions or apologizing to Doris? And why had he continued to make business plans for the future right up until his death? The truth about Martin Melcher's death remains unknown to this day. What is certain is that his sudden demise marked the end of one chapter of Doris Day's life and the beginning of another darker one. The discovery of his criminal connections and financial betrayals shattered her faith in the people closest to her. The possibility that he had been murdered, or had killed himself, left her with questions that could never be answered. Most tragically, it destroyed her ability to trust and love without fear. Martin's death changed everything for Doris, said biographer David Kaufman, not just because of the money he had stolen, but because of the mysteries surrounding how and why he died. She spent the rest of her life wondering if the man she had loved for 17 years had been a victim or a villain, and whether his death had been justice or murder. When Doris Day died in 2019, more than 50 years after Martin's mysterious death, she was still asking those questions. In her final years, she would sometimes mention Martin to close friends, always with a mixture of sadness and confusion. "I loved him," she would say, "but I never really knew him, and I'll never know what really happened to him." The mystery of Martin Melcher's death remains one of Hollywood's greatest unsolved cases. Was he murdered by criminals who wanted their money back? Did he kill himself to escape an impossible situation? Or did he simply die of natural causes at the worst possible time, leaving behind evidence of crimes that made his death look suspicious? The truth died with Martin on that April night, but the consequences of his mysterious death, and the secrets that were revealed after it, continued to shape Doris Day's life until the very end. America's sweetheart never smiled quite the same way again, and the man who had promised to love and protect her had left her with nothing but questions, debts, and the terrifying knowledge that she had never really known him at all. The mysterious circumstances surrounding Martin Melcher's death changed everything for Doris. They turned love into suspicion, trust into fear, and left her wondering if the people closest to us are sometimes the greatest strangers of all.